got a good number of people in, so I'm going to go ahead and start. I am Ann Shade, if no one knew that. And I am here on this illustrious panel of writers, and we're going to discuss epiphanies. And epiphany is like that aha moment in your story where either the character comes into a realization, or if it's a fantasy or a mystery where that moment happens where the truth comes out or the killer is revealed or something within that range. So instead of the usual old boring bios, I'm going to give a question to my authors, and that will be their way of introducing themselves to you, because I'm sure you know all these lovely faces by now. It's been 2 weekends. And if you don't know them, I'm sure you've read their books at some point, so now you see their faces. So I'm going to start with, all right, we'll start with Genevieve. So will you tell us an epiphany you've had since becoming an author?
Well, there's been quite a few, but I suppose the biggest one is just simply that it's not going to please everyone. You need to go for the story that you want to tell, and that will find an audience.
That's a major epiphany. I've had that one several times.
Same.
Casey?
Well, I've had 6 books published with Bold Strokes Books, and I've had many epiphanies along the way. First and foremost, coming up with the title and the back cover blurb is way harder than writing the damn story. Trying to sum up the book without giving away too much of the plot in 2 to 3 paragraphs is just too much.
Stressful. Very stressful. I actually just posted something today about that. All right, we will next go to Renee.
For me, it's realizing that even though it should have been pretty much intuitive, that what happens with the characters and their story is up to me. And I can adjust it along the way to fit what the characters, and they do in some way, lead the story. And sometimes they surprise me. And I'm like, oh, I didn't see that one coming. So now we need to go in a little bit different direction. Although the end result is pretty much the same. That was in the proposal, but not always. And I'm sure Sandy cringes every time I send one in.
As long as you're close, you're going to ride the line.
They just kind of take a little curve every now and then. But it's been fun learning that, I really do control what happens on the page.
All right, Sheri.
I think for me, it was that there's so much more to it than simply writing the book. So you write the book and you send it in and they accept it. You've only begun the work at that point. And there's, I think for most of us, we're introverts by nature because writing is a solitary endeavor. But you end up having to go out in the world with your children, if you will. And I think the delightful part of it is the epiphany is for being someone who is, I like to stay in my little corner. I've learned to be more outgoing, and I've learned to be more social, and I've met some absolutely delightful people along the way.
And last but certainly not least, Tagan.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a lot of epiphanies too about, how great the community is and all the work that goes into, publishing a book. But since I'm a romance author, I decided I had to do a romance style epiphany, which is in romances, characters have epiphanies about themselves. So I think for me, the biggest one was just discovering that I have a stories worth telling. That my voice people connect with and they like what I write sometimes. So that's just really super validating and it feels great. So yeah, finding my voice.
Excellent. All right, so pretty much everyone has had the same type of epiphany where it's finding out what type of writer that they are, which is important when you're an author to know what your focus is. Unlike me, who's all over the place. So, all right, I'm gonna go backwards now. And then I'm gonna do this question, and then I see some questions popping up in the Q&A. All right, so we'll start backwards with Tagan. What is a major epiphany moment in your current book that hopefully won't be a spoiler?
So I really like the epiphany that that Carter has in Pumpkin Spice. Carter is the love interest in a first person point of view book, so we don't get to see inside her head. But that's kind of fun because we get to see the truth before she sees it through the eyes of the person she loves. But it's she's one of those people, like that quintessential stoic butch who just wants to be everything for everyone. And she stretches herself way too thin, trying to, be the perfect sister and daughter and worker and girlfriend, and, ends up not taking care of herself well, which again makes it harder for you to be all of those things, right? And I really like that because I think that's a common struggle for women and anyone who is socialized female. That's kind of what's bred into us, right? Is that we have to be that caretaker, and so learning that it's okay for us to be happy, to make ourselves happy, because being that caretaker isn't always the thing that makes you happy. So yeah, like being able to break out of that and be your full self. I love that moment for Carter, especially because she is a masculine presenting woman. So it's kind of a different take on that. Usually you think of like femmes as caretakers, but yeah, so I had fun with that.
I actually disagree with that. I think there are a lot of butch characters who are more caretakers than femmes are.
That's true. I mean, I guess in the world at large, you think of in the heteronormative like scope, I guess
Yeah.
you think of that. But yeah, I do think that butches, we tend to be more caretakers.
All right, Sheri.
So for me in Buried Secrets, because it's like a paranormal thriller with romance in it, there's a few epiphanies and they sort of all tumble towards the end. But I particularly like the one with Tuesday and Addie as we're getting to the climax. And, I'm not really going to go into detail because it's really an important piece of the story, but it's a reminder that things are not always what they seem. And for them, that was a huge aha moment. But there's also the aha moments with the romance. And so in this type of book, I had to kind of incorporate a couple of them.
Okay. All right. Next we have Renee.
It is the fear of vulnerability that keeps us from admitting it's already too late. Even though the character struggles with what's happening and, they can resist and that's not what they want, at that point, it's already too late. But the fight continues.
Casey.
In my latest release, Every Beat of Her Heart, there's quite a few epiphanies. Two of them are Piper and Jillian each realizing that they have the capacity and the want to fall in love and to be with someone that they can laugh with, cry with, celebrate with, and everything else that comes along with relationships. But the major epiphany is Piper's and about midway through the story, but you'll have to read it to find out what it is.
Yes, no spoilers here. Genevieve.
I think probably the most significant epiphany in my most recent novel, A Second Chance at Life, would be Dina realizing just how different she and Rachel are now. It's been 23 years since they've last seen each other, and she had just assumed they'd be able to walk right back into that relationship that they used to have, but they are incredibly different people now, and she's struggling a lot with that for about the first half of the book.
I have to say, the concept of your book is like so fascinating to me. A vampire that spends time in prison is just
Thank you.
that is pretty awesome. That is like a level I would have never thought to go. All right. I thought there were questions, but no, there's just lovely comments. So I'll go on to the next one. So what is your process for creating these epiphany moments? I'll start with Casey.
Well, I'm not sure if I actually have a process for creating them, but in romance they need to be there. The characters need to realize why they can't live without each other, and despite their character flaws. And as long as they aren't malicious, because I mean, really, who wants to be with someone like that? But that's to realize that, okay, this is the person that I want to be with, and they really didn't. Maybe I misunderstood or something, and that needs to happen.
Okay. All right, Renee.
I let it evolve organically. And, I'll get to a point where, they're just having so much fun and blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, but there has to be some questioning, some type of like, why, or how did this happen? Or am I ready for this to happen? Those kinds of things. And then admitting the fact that, yeah, this is really what they want. I don't have a process for those aha moments. They just kind of happen where they're supposed to. I have on occasion written one that I thought belonged somewhere. And I was like, no, that can't happen now. It has to happen later. Or my editor might say, this has to happen later. But the main thing is getting it on the page, because then at least I can fix it.
So it sounds like your aha moments are connected to angsty moments. Is that true?
They are, because I think they make us think deeper. They make us examine what's going on. They make us, we're forced to look at the situation and not just kind of go along willy-nilly and not ask the important questions that will hopefully eventually lead to a long-term relationship.
Okay. All right. Genevieve?
I kind of have to agree with the other two that have gone so far, that it really just kind of happens as a natural part of story progression. Like, you want to have the characters growing throughout the story, and a necessarily part of growth is questioning your beliefs and your assumptions.
All right. Sheri?
For me, I'm like Renee. It tends to be very organic. And because in most of my stories, there's a mystery thriller element along with both the paranormal and the romance, I come into it thinking I know what it's going to be. And then there will be time, including like this Buried Secrets, there is one of those aha moments I didn't see coming. And as I was writing, it was like, oh, well, isn't that interesting? And so you let it go. And for the romance, for me, a lot of times it boils down to an issue of trust in believing that this is true and real and that they're not going to be hurt. Because I think a lot of us struggle with that anyway. We don't want to be hurt. And so we may tend to fold into ourselves. And so it's those moments where they have to trust and they have to believe. And so those, again, like Renee, for me, it's organic as I go along.
Okay. Tagan?
So I'm a little bit different in that I have been thinking a lot recently about the process of getting to epiphanies, and that's a lot of it is in romances. The epiphany moment happens during the third act breakup, where the characters are, have a moment of stepping back, and and then they have to decide, they have to kind of find something that makes them go back in or lose the love of their life, right? Well, I'm a big sissy and I don't like third act breakups anymore. So I've kind of moved away from writing third act breakups. So what that ends up looking like instead is having that epiphany moment that characters kind of go through together. Either like they share those moments, literally share those moments together, which is happening in my work in progress, or like in Pumpkin Spice, they're kind of, they talk through those epiphanies together. And so that kind of leads into like a really nice way of building healthy communication, which I think is absolutely essential to a good relationship. So it's like that ends up bringing in this other element of the story. And it's also different. I used to write those a lot, but as I've moved away from being moved toward being a little less angsty, my process has had to change, which is kind of a fun new challenge.
So you've had another epiphany for yourself as an author.
Exactly. Thanks, COVID. I can't handle stress anymore.
For my paranormal authors, do you feel that the epiphanies, there's probably more epiphanies in your stories than there are within just the general romance stories, or do you feel it kind of evens itself out? Genevieve?
I think it really depends. This book in particular certainly has quite a few epiphanies, and there being a slight murder mystery element as well adds even more epiphanies. But I think it can really depend. I guess I already said that. Especially if you're having it so all of your characters are already aware of supernatural stuff. It's not like they have the realization necessarily. When you have humans entering the non-mundane world, then definitely you're going to have a lot of epiphanies.
Okay. Sheri?
Yeah, I agree with Genevieve. It just sort of is story driven, even though you have that elements, because there may be the epiphany as to this otherworldly thing that humans don't want to see. But in some of my stories, it's I like to twist the world so they already actually know. So then you're looking at the epiphanies always in terms of those relationships, and then the murder thriller part of it where you have to have that coming together in that aha moment.
All right. Audience, once again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, just so I can make sure I can get them to our authors. My next question is, what is the key to a great epiphany moment, and in what way should it change the story? I'll start with Tagan.
So I think the most important thing in a romance epiphany is that the hang-up is believable. I think a lot of times it's easy to fall into that crisis moment that is actually not a crisis so much as a misunderstanding. And so then it doesn't lead to a really fulfilling epiphany, because it does have to really change that character. And so what I really like is like the best friend or family member having the conversation and being like, look, you big idiot, like this is what's going on. And like, because I always like to read those, and then I can just kind of picture that family member or friend like whispering, I have told you this 1,000 times and now you're finally hearing me. Okay, fine, whatever. But yeah, what it ends up being is that friend and family member moment within the epiphany becomes like another love story. It's a platonic one, but it's another love story, and I'm a sucker for a love story, so I just kind of love that.
All right, Genevieve.
I think the best way to handle an epiphany is that divergence of want and need that we did a whole panel about last week, or at least went in a lot on one of the panels. That the character should be realizing that what they want and need were separate things, and exactly how they've been deluding themselves over it.
All right, Sheri.
I'm like with what's been said here too. It's really got to be important. Even the paranormal element, it can't just be, oh, it's real. No, it has to be something significant and something that makes the story pivot, if you will. And so if you don't have that, who's going to believe it? Even when we're writing the paranormal and we're asking the reader to believe something that maybe isn't believable. And so you've got to tread that fine line there and make it important, make it how you would believe it, and and just propel that story forward.
Okay. Renee?
I like it to be an unexpected moment to the character. Something that maybe they were thinking about their grocery list, and then suddenly something pops into their head and they're like, oh, that's why, so and so said this, or that's why they did this certain thing. And that kind of changes that push me, pull you, going back and forth kind of thing to, we need to talk about this, or I need to do something to figure out, is this just my imagination or is it real? Because I think that there's a certain amount of angsty kind of push and pull. Yes, I can. No, I can't. Do I love this person? Do I not? Can we really have a relationship? Can we not? There has to be something that triggers that all off and moves them into a more direct line of, I really want this to happen. So what can I do? Or what needs to happen to make it real for both of us?
Yeah. All right, Casey.
I think the key is that the character has to realize something that they might have done wrong, and how they can change it and how to be a better person. Usually, that black moment where there was some misunderstanding, and it's usually one character that was just completely dropped the ball, that can't come to grips with something, or spoke out of turn or something like that. And they have to be able to learn from it. And like in real life, if it's an opportunity for us to learn from our mistakes and or misinterpretations, to grow as a person emotionally.
So the epiphany pretty much does drive the story. It kind of drives it to the next level of where the characters kind of finish out, or how it all plays out for them, basically. I think there was a question in chat. Let's see. Have you ever had an epiphany in the middle of writing your stories that required you to do a complete rewrite or extend the story? So I'll start with Casey.
I think I answered that in the chat, but when I was writing Courageous Love, this might sound weird to people other than the writers, but Alex's voice was talking to me in my head, and it wasn't what I had planned for her, but she's like, no, this is what happens. And I was like, oof, okay, well, let me think about this, because I'm not sure if I want to take you in that direction. And she really didn't give me an opportunity to change my mind. But it didn't require me to rewrite, but it did require me to delve deeper into what she was going through and how she was going to get out of it.
So it sounds to me like all your characters pretty much drive your epiphany moments. You have no say in anything.
No say whatsoever.
I don't feel so bad now. All right. When is the right time for a character epiphany, and is there a bad time for it? I know, Renee, you mentioned that your editor tells you that it's too soon for that.
Yeah, sometimes I never thought about authors who write out of sequence, because I know a few who do, and I would probably stab myself in the eye and in my career if if that was how I wrote, because my mind just doesn't work that way. But there are times when I will realize you have already written like the crisis moment and you are on chapter 3. Or my author will say, my editor will say, if this happens and this happens, this can't possibly happen in chapter 2. that has to like move way down. So I guess in a way I do write out of sequence, but I don't know it at the time. So yes, I tend to put them either halfway or later, because all the other stuff, the building up and the meeting and the getting to know each other, I think that you have to have that, like in real life, before you can say, oh my God, this is something amazing that's happening. And, you know, if you do that in chapter 1, what are you going to fill into chapter 25? So, yeah, it's just, it is the natural sequence of life that kind of dictates when that should happen, at least to me. And I think that my editor's a little happier when that happens too. Thanks,
Sheri.
you.
I'm the same way as Renee. I mean, there will maybe be some, I would call them minor epiphanies earlier in the book, because it's part of the growth that's going on. And so it may change the direction a little bit, but the major aha moment for me is always going to be at the end, which I think my editor is happier with too.
All we are to do is make our editors happy. Tagan.
Yeah, so this makes me think about, there was a time I heard Rad talking, and she said, if your characters say I love you before like the 75% mark, you're completely shot because you don't have anywhere to go. And it's kind of the same thing with that epiphany, right? Is that they've got to be invested already, because we don't, as humans, we don't change unless we have to, right? Like, I don't think any of us really like change, but it's like, it's one of those things where you have to have already decided it's worth it. So it has to be pretty far along in the story, I feel like. So yeah.
Casey.
Yeah, I kind of second what Tagan says.
Direct and to the point. Genevieve.
I pretty much just have to echo Sheri that there should be a lot of little epiphanies throughout the story, and then, you know, a major one more towards the climax.
All right. We have another question in the chat. Have you ever faced challenges in integrating an epiphany into your narrative? And I'll start with Genevieve.
I'm honestly not sure. I'm trying to think of any time that's really happened. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, at least, but I'm sure it's at least somewhat come. Yeah.
Can anyone think of an example?
I actually have one. And this is me having to pat my editor on the back. So Ashley, my editor, with Pumpkin Spice, said, I gave her my manuscript, and her first comment back was, "This is a great book. Finish writing it." Because I didn't go deep enough, and she was right. I didn't go deep enough into the characters, and actually, it wasn't until I added like 15 or 20,000 words to the end. I mean, it was a lot I added. And in that is where I got to go deeper into Carter's character and have her epiphany moment. So without that push, you know, I wouldn't have gone deep enough into her as a character. So that's why we have editors.
Anyone else? No? All right, let's see. Do you believe that the significance of an epiphany differs across genres? Sorry, you may have already answered this. I think we talked about it with the paranormal fantasy. But romance writers, do you feel it kind of differs from what you like, anything you've read that shows that the epiphany is different than what what you write in your genre, if you read out of your genre? Renee?
I think that it's really character driven. I mean, there are definitely some characters that I've written that are very insightful and cognizant of what's happening to them while it's happening. But there are also just as many characters that aren't aware that this is like a romance that's happening. You know, they're just out having fun and great sex and woohoo. This, you know, this will take me through the summer 6 months or whatever. And then they have the epiphany of, oh shit, this is real. This is like not just a summer fling kind of thing, or, oh, I just kind of fell into this little tryst. Yeah, and I think it actually happens more in erotic romances because that is sexually driven stories of love and romance that develop through the sex. So I think that those come at a different time than regular romance,
Okay.
contemporary
Okay.
romance.
Casey, you want to answer that one or?
I agree with Renee that it can be that a lot of times it is character driven, but I think it also could be story driven. I mean, just depending on what the story is and where it's going. And you know, I mean, there might be epiphanies early on that might be minor, and then the major one comes later. But I think it can be both of character and story driven.
All right, Tagan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have a lot to add. I would say, because I love to read across genres, one of the things I like is how different that moment is in every different genre. So it's just really fascinating for me to just see how that changes across genre. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I think of, so when it comes to writing your epiphanies, I'm trying to, because we have a lot of time left here and we're not getting much questions. Okay, when it comes to writing your epiphanies, what do you feel like your character's major goal is? Is it to reach that happily ever after, or is it to reach their happily ever after with the partner or with the lover in their story, or with their own self security? I can't think of the word I want to say. You guys understand me. I figure as other writers you might understand me. Okay. Take it, I'll let you start since you thought it up.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think this is where it is very much character driven, because I've had characters. There's so my April release last year, When It Feels Right, it was a character who came out late in life. And so a lot for her was that idea of like, you can't love somebody else until you love yourself. And so a lot of the epiphany was actually more about her trying to, like, moving to that place where she could love herself so that she could be a good partner. And so that was, it was a different kind of epiphany than I think I've ever written. And I think that was so important for her as a character to kind of become a whole person, that, yeah, it was a little different. I mean, I think that mostly what I write is characters who are, you know, who are making these changes so that they can, you know, find the love of their life, right? But it was kind of neat for that one, to have her having that moment, Marlene having that moment, so she could love herself.
Okay, Genevieve.
Generally either I or my characters want them to complete their growth, and the other one of us wants them to just get their happily ever after. It really depends per character which one it is, though, for which of us.
It's a personality battle.
Of course.
Sheri.
I'm a big fan of happily ever after, so that's always on my mind. But it's also a case of, for me, a lot of times it's circumstances have pushed them into a situation that's uncomfortable, and then they come to understand that epiphany is that their life needed to change, And by golly, it's actually changed for the better. Even though there may be murder, mayhem, vampires, werewolves, but in the end, when the epiphany happens, you understand that this is a better place to be.
All right, Casey.
I definitely think it's both. When, obviously in romance, the character wants the happily ever after, but also I think it's that they might not want to make that mistake again. They want to learn from it and not make like be able to grow from it. So I think it's both.
Yeah. Renee?
I think it happens more with the jilted lover or the unexpected breakup. That they become more aware of their own cluelessness as to what was happening in their relationship, and they just don't want it to happen again. And I think that lends itself to hesitancy and not wanting to get involved, or I'm going to focus on me because obviously I wasn't paying enough attention, kind of thing. And I think that really makes for a major aha moment when they're like, you know what, all this work on myself isn't really gonna give me the end result that I'm looking for. And everyone's looking for love, aren't they?
Yeah.
Let's hope.
Yeah. So I'll go to my last question, and then I think, okay, here's one. That was actually my last question. Do you try to write different epiphanies with each book, or do all epiphanies have a similar theme? That's a good question. Start with KC.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, they're gonna be different because the characters are different, the storyline's different. But I mean, but they're also kind of the same because it's the aha, right? I mean, they have to learn what they did wrong and in order to make things right again. So yeah. Sorry, my
That's okay.
menopausal brain is like I have words in it and then they just fly out. So
I know the feeling. Hence why I had to write notes.
Oh my gosh. Oh gosh. Yeah.
So Sheri, do you feel like since and Genevieve, you too, since you write paranormals, do you find your epiphanies are similar in each story, or it, like with what Casey said, it changes depending on the character?
It's rude.
Oh, good.
She said you first. It's fine.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I think they do change, but there's also, I mean, there are some similarities in it, but the story, like Casey said, the characters are different, the setting's different, my creatures are different. So what drives one may not drive the other. And so I try to have them be different. Now, whether or not I succeed at that, I'm not sure, but I put in the effort.
All right, Genevieve?
I would say as a whole, they tend to be pretty different between, from book to book. It's certainly character driven, as everyone else has said, but genre also matters a lot, and how much of it is based around romance can influence things quite a bit. Though also, there are only so many different ways people can have the realization that they're worthy of love.
Tagan?
Yeah, I think that last thing that Genevieve said is really important, right? Is that, all of the epiphanies are different in that they're specific to the camera or to the character, but like there's that idea of it's you're not letting someone in, right? It's like that you're not surrendering to love, and that's why like your relationships haven't worked in the past. So in order to believe that this relationship will work, it does have to be in some ways a very similar epiphany in that like I'm ready now. I'm ready to let someone else in. I'm ready to be vulnerable. I'm ready to face my biggest fear. So kind of both.
Renee?
I don't specifically go in with a particular, like, okay, this is the epiphany that all my romances have to have or whatever. And I think that there's different degrees of epiphanies. I think that you can have a lot of little ones that equal a big one towards the end of the book. But I don't think that you have to have like an earth-shattering kind of epiphany that throws them so off kilter they'll never come back to center. I think that those are responsible for ending relationships as much as they are for solidifying them. You know, if it's too big to overcome, if it's too big to realize, if it's too big to even think about the forces of nature that are involved with, securing the relationship, it may be a point for pulling back. So I think that there's a fine line between, and it depends on the strength of the character too. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's earth shattering to one is simply, a little annoyance to another. So I think that we have to remember that everyone is different, and what's an epiphany for someone else may not be the same for you or I.
Okay. Here's one. How do you create an epiphany that's not hitting your readers over the head, but still ensures the readers get it and also have that aha moment? Start with Genevieve.
Well, that's always a tough balance to manage. I would say it's gonna depend on how thick-headed your protagonist is. If they can manage to realize something subtly enough, then the audience will hopefully notice it along with them. And if not, well, then they're the one being beaten over the head more so than the audience, at least.
Casey?
I'm rereading that question, and how do you create an epiphany that's not hitting your readers over the head? That's tough. I think there's so many writers out there who are fantastic, and some of the storylines, I mean, there's like a certain amount of tropes that we write, and so sometimes the story will sound familiar, and it's like, oh yeah, I think I read this somewhere, and this is what happens, and it's hard to sometimes it's hard to not hit the readers over the head with those. Maybe they've already read some version of it, or you know what I mean? Like it's not the people, some readers think, oh, I know where this is going, and sometimes they do. I think it's pretty challenging to write the epiphany that isn't going to hit them over the head. That they won't know until the very end.
You don't want to make it predictable.
Right.
Right.
The long way of saying that.
Renee?
I don't know. I mean, it was just I don't know, last week, last month, last year. I don't know, because I have no memory anymore. So, like I have to like reread the sentence that I just wrote 2 seconds ago when I'm writing. So, but I don't think that there is, I like surprises in my books. I like writing them. I like throwing in little things that are like, oh, well, that's different, or that's interesting kind of thing. Those kind of epiphanies I like writing. I don't think I want to hit anyone over the head intentionally. Well, maybe some of my erotic novels do hit them over the head and get their attention really quickly, but
hit them over the head, tie them up.
Yeah, that's right. I like that. Let's keep that. but I think that the readers are smart enough to just follow along. And when you give them a breadcrumb to follow, like they'll even go, oh, I wonder if they're gonna. And then you can give them that epiphany, and it may or may not be what they thought was going to happen. I like playing the devil's advocate a lot. So I tend to give things and then not snatch them away, but like just face them in a whole different direction and make them go, oh, kind of thing. And hopefully that keeps them interested in what's happening till you get to the end. If that makes any sense.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe it's time for wine.
Wine time.
I feel
Sheri?
like my part of the panel would go so much better if I had some wine right now.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine. You weren't prepared for some of these questions, so Sheri.
I think you have to sort of build upon it throughout the story. And so it can be very subtle, but then when you get to that epiphany, and maybe it does bonk them on the head, but at the same time, then they're saying, oh, wait a minute, now this all makes sense. And all that, the building blocks you had earlier fall into place. So that's how, when I'm writing, that's what's in my head as I'm getting there.
Okay. Tagan.
Sheri said it much better than I did.
So I don't know if this is a controversial take, but I don't necessarily think it's always a bad thing to not be subtle. So hitting over the head, right? Okay, that's one thing. But like, so in romance, like those tropes, right, that we just talked about, those, we come back to those because they're comfort reads. We come back to the, like, that's one of the things that romance readers like, at least me as a romance reader. And that might also be because I'm also a fanfic reader. And so I love my tropes. But, there's those storylines we love, and that's why we keep coming back to them. So trying to reinvent the wheel sometimes is actually worse, I guess. You know what I mean? Like if you've got a neat little twist on it, great. But like, we all know what's going to happen. They're going to live happily ever after. And that's the comfort read part of it, and throwing those tropes in there and having some fun with it, and maybe doing something well that you like, right? Those tropes that you like, doing them well is a good thing.
Right. Okay, we only have a few minutes, so I'll go to the final question that I had. What is your all-time favorite epiphany moment from either one of your own books or one you've read? We'll start with Sheri.
Oh, okay. So I thought about this when you asked us this earlier, and I'm going to go way, way back to when I was a kid, and I read the book Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Because in my head, she does the most outstanding job with characters. And the epiphany moment in the end of that book is like, oh crap, really? And everything tumbles into place. So I've been trying to learn to do that ever since I was a teenager. So that's mine.
All right. Genevieve?
My favorite, at least from one of mine, is actually in my upcoming book, Snake Charming in May. Snake Charming coming out in May, not Snake Charming in May. They are, the main character, Freddie, is struggling a lot with the idea that she's actually been hurting the people that she's been just having fun with from her point of view, and realizing that she actually cares about that and wants the people in her life to be a bigger part of her life is a huge realization for her after years and years of trying to avoid that.
Right. Tagan?
So this is a really hard one for me because I love so many different genres. Also because my wife and I are currently doing a watch through of Murder, She Wrote, and I love that epiphany in every episode where somebody says something innocuous and Jessica's like, I got it. But That's not it. The answer is from the book Breaking Character by Lee Winter. That moment where Bess realizes that her mentor Grace has been like stringing her along basically her whole life, and using her. And she has this moment where she picks herself and she realizes that she needs to let go of this forever crush and let Summer in. And it's like this really beautiful moment. And bonus points to Angela Daw for reading that perfectly in the audiobook version. So yeah, that's my favorite.
All right. Casey?
I couldn't think of one specific moment because I read so much and I love so many books. But I love it when a character or both think they're just going to have a non-committal sexual relationship or friends with benefits or just having a good time. And then, oh shit, they're starting to find, develop feelings, deeper feelings for the other person. And they've convinced themselves that they don't want or need a relationship, but they end up realizing they don't want to go through life without the other person. So those are, that's kind of like the epiphany that I love. But so many books have it, so I couldn't pick just one.
Okay. Renee?
I'm going to go way back to my second book, Stroke of Fate, where Jade Rivers, who's an author, realizes that her bodyguard, Sean, has unprofessional feelings for her. And the scene where she realizes that was like so much fun to write, number one. And number two, it so much revealed both their characters of Jade kind of walking through life and just doing her thing and not really aware of what's going on around her. And for Sean, realizing that she's not always in control.
All right. Those are some great suggestions, folks. We also are having a sale, so be sure to check that out. And they'll be in the chat. The informations are in the chats in each event. That is it. I thank our wonderful authors for giving us their aha moments. And hopefully we'll continue giving them in many more books to come. Have fun with the rest of the weekend, folks, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.